I was in the pharmacy the other day because I'm going to Germany this weekend with Dave, and so I'm in there and I'm talking to there's a sweet little old lady behind the counter, and we were chatting away and we're talking about the coronavirus and everything else, and I'm like, look, do you have any surgical masks? Because just for my own kind of safekeeping and everything, I'm going away this weekend and it might be beneficial to have one. Though since then I've been reading up on about it and they're not really useful unless you have it, then it could be useful. So she goes behind the counter and she brings back a pack of two. And there's like the two types of surgical masks. There's just the kind of plain like nylon one or whatever it is. And there's a slightly more fancier one. And it was that one. And I was like, okay, perfect, awesome. And we're chatting away for a little bit more. And, she's really sweet, really just it was a pleasant conversation. And then I say to her, so how much will that be? And she goes, well, actually, Jack, how much do you think a pack of these two surgical masks are in the current climate?
Oh, yeah, I mean, they could really, really fleece you now. I feel like when she was talking to you, she was probably trying to gauge how much of a hypochondriac you are. Like, if you've been twitching the whole time and, half crying about it, she'd have been like, right, that'll be 58 euros. I'm going to guess 12 euros.
Keep going.
20 euros.
Keep going.
25 euros.
25 euros.
Oh, I got for two masks, yeah?
Yeah. So I've seen as well that apparently hand sanitizer over here is selling in places for about £8. But I looked at her and I was like, I'm good, thanks. And you've never seen a 180 on a person from just like a pleasant conversation to this look of sheer disdain for me that I am rejecting this fucking extortionate price that she's throwing my way. And it's probably not the first time that she had that conversation that day. And I was like, you know what? I'd rather just be fucking bedridden for a week. Like, bring on the flu. I will take it head on. I don't know.
It depends. You're you're rolling the dice there. Do you feel like you're the sort of person that would perish from this ailment?
Well, I know I'm old, but I think 32 is within a reasonable time frame to be dealing with this, and my immune system isn't too bad. But, I'm sure I'll survive. In the meantime, this is Link to the Cast, your weekly dose of video games and nerd culture ephemera, available everywhere good podcasts are sold. I am not Dave Ryan. I'm, in fact, Mark Robinson. I'll be seeing Dave this weekend in Germany. Hopefully, between the two of us, we will survive the weekend, but we are going to be surrounded by a lot of wrestling fans. So, I'm pretty sure, by the end of the weekend, half of Germany will be wiped out. But until then, this is also the Roman Reigns of audio. It is Jack Lazell. Jack, how are you?
I'm alright. I am not going to Germany, so I feel like your predictions of your early demise are probably slightly exaggerated. I feel like the worst thing that's going to happen is you might get the sniffles, and probably not from coronavirus, probably just from a common cold or something in Germany.
I just imagine, again, the general hygiene of your atypical wrestling fan. I mean, I'm going to end up with something by the end of the weekend. I know I will.
Yeah, but if not, I'm going to get my Rolodex out. I'm going to flick through. I'm going to go... I mean, Barry's going with you, isn't he? Okay,
yeah, he'll be there.
I got Brian I could hit up. Keith Broney I could hit up. I got Matt Niner I could hit up. I'm just thinking, if you and Dave do happen to perish from this virus, I'm going to have to, the flag bearer in the army, if they get shot, someone else has to pick up the flag and carry it. I feel like that's going to be me. I'm going to be carrying this video game's flag. I'll give you, I'd say a 2-minute tribute at the start of the next show and then just plow straight into
5 years of doing this podcast and I get 2 minutes.
I mean, 1 minute for you, 1 minute for Dave.
All right, fair enough. Can you at least make sure that it's done to one of those WWE tribute packages? I want a compilation clip set to my sacrifice that I could do for.
What's the one that's I will remember you? That really cheesy, horrible one. That I'm singing really off pitch just because.
Nope, I got nothing.
Oh, I mean, someone out there is hearing this and they immediately know what the name of that song is.
Didn't they do the Scientist for Randy Savage? And I think that was insane to think that they would put Coldplay with Randy Savage, yet it worked phenomenally well.
Did they have his career in reverse, like the Scientist video?
Yeah, actually, do you know what? I've just realised the painful irony of that, because he died in a car accident, and the music video for that is there's a car crash.
Oh my god, there really is.
I don't think they. Maybe they did realize that. I don't know.
I mean, I didn't think Randy Savage was Mr. Popular around there, but even well, I was gonna say even WWE wouldn't be that shameless.
Maybe he was a massive Coldplay fan. Who knows?
Imagine that, like somebody as big and tough as like Randy Savage, you know, crushing that pepperami like sticks of meat on an almost hourly basis, and his favorite band is Coldplay. Like he has a picture of Chris Martin up over his bed.
Honestly, I love it when you watch a video or like an interview with like some heavy as fuck metal band and they talk about loving ABBA or like whatever else, and they always just talk about, no, fuck it, yeah, like pop music is great. And it's always that weird juxtaposition that you're not prepared for, but like it's all music and it's all relative. So, you know, like I love, you know, when the Kurt Cobain talks about loving ABBA or the Beatles.
I was gonna say that wasn't someone from Geffen trying to stop him talking about how much he loved the Beatles and all of the harmonies and double tracking that he did with Butch Vig on the record was like, oh, I was just trying to be like, you know, John Lennon. And they were trying to be like, no, man, you're like the leader of Generation X. Nobody wants to hear you talk about how much you fucking love When I'm 64, mate. So,
but wasn't it? I think wasn't he like apprehensive to it? And Butch Vig kept saying, it's like, oh well, you know, Lennon did it, so.
Well, no, that's how he got him to do stuff. But like, I think the record company at the time, when he would talk in interviews about liking the Beatles, I think. Because everything about that sort of weird Generation X personality of being like counterculture and just generally sort of, you know, against everything that your mum and dad would listen to. Like the Beatles absolutely fell into that boomer category of something that they would have grown up on. So Gen X just blowing away the sort of boomer, you know, reality of the world. They didn't want people to be then referencing back to the Beatles. But you know what? I mean, you pick up a Beatles record now and you're like, shit, this is still really good. So, yeah.
But it's ridiculous because if you look at like the four pillars of the Seattle scene, they're all melodic as fuck.
Oh, incredibly.
And like Alice in Chains in particular, the harmonies between Lane Stanley and Cantrell, like they're insane. They're incredible. Well, when you thirds and fifths and whatever else.
Think about this though, like you could take the heaviest of heavy metal. If there's no melody to attach onto, whether it's like guitar or something, then it's not going to be that successful. But like the most successful metal bands of all time are unquestionably Metallica and Iron Maiden, right? And they both have incredibly melodic guitar players in the band, and they both have frontmen who have got like incredibly unique singing voices and the way that they pick notes out above and they sing. And melody is incredibly important in music, and I just think it's everything I hate about like formless jazz and stuff like that, where it's just like the melody is like a one trumpet and it's not sticking to any particular pattern. But we're all sort of pre-programmed to accept like melodic and progressive melodic things in a certain format, like and it doesn't matter what type of music it is. Every song that you hear, there'll be a melody in there that will latch onto you if it's popular. If it isn't popular, you probably won't hear it anyway.
To this day, I think my favourite description of anything ever is when Noel Gallagher talks about jazz, and it's four musicians playing four completely like different songs in four different time signatures, and it's jazz.
What it is usually is, I mean, there is like a lack of boundaries and a sort of interesting kind of approach to music.
I'm sorry, lack of boundaries. You're talking about Eurovision there.
No, I'm talking well, clearly the boundaries in Eurovision are important because everybody who shares a border boundary with each other ends up voting for each other.
There he is.
That's why we are on a tiny island and everybody hates us. But then, you know, some of that's colonialism. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Yeah, like jazz is it's usually incredible musicians just showing off how good their music is over a sort of loose beat in a weird time signature with a drummer playing percussion on brushes. It's like, fuck off, mate, get some drumsticks, all right? Like, I don't want to hear your brush nonsense. Plug that double bass in as well, crank that up. I want to hear what the bass line is. I don't want to hear some like guy with a trumpet just going mental for like 3.5 minutes, you know. It's just, it's too much for me. And I'm sorry, people that like jazz. Probably aren't listening to this podcast, but if they do hear it, I'm sure they're going to tell me why jazz is amazing. And it just ain't for me. So, yeah.
So this is a preview of our upcoming music podcast that you can listen to in about 3 years' time when we get round to it. But in the meantime, Jack, happy birthday.
Are we going to be breaking down the greatest hits of Charlie Parker and John Coltrane?
I mean, someone's got to fucking do it.
I thought we'd be more like Radiohead, like Nirvana, Weezer, all that kind of shit we listened to growing up. Oh, mate.
Also, growing up, we played the PlayStation 2, which today turned 20 years old
What
as
a
of
console.
today of this recording.
I'm looking at mine right now across the room.
You still have yours? Fuck me.
It's beautiful. Look at it. It's sat over there just
You say
winking
beautiful.
at me.
I would imagine it's covered in a few inches of dust at this point.
It's quite dusty, but the good thing about it is I gave my my first PS2, like my chunky PS2, to my friend Adam Walker because I inherited from somebody the slimline PS2 and it's grey. So if it is really dusty, I've got no concept of how dusty it is because it's grey. So it just looks like part of the paint job, as it were.
Your earliest memory of having a PlayStation 2?
I mean, it's just the initial incredible excitement and anticipation for the console, because the first home console I had was a Sony PlayStation, and it was my parents at the time. They weren't earning a particularly high wage, either of them, so it was a big deal for them to buy me a PlayStation, and like I was eternally grateful for it, and I loved that fucking console to death. That and my Game Boy were basically my formative years of getting me through sort of like years 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and stuff. And then the PS2 came out. I probably had to wait about a year or so, and just unpacking it, and just it looked so sleek, and like I was just so incredibly hyped when I got it. How about you, mate? What was?
So I don't remember getting a PlayStation 2 directly at launch. Not that I recall. I think it was probably the Christmas of that year or the year after.
That's what I think. Yeah, I can't remember when was the EU launch. If you got that information in front of you,
I don't, but I will get that for you.
I'm gonna Google that. You carry on talking because I've banged on about my my PlayStation.
But what I remember, because at the time I was still heavily invested with my Nintendo 64 and my Game Boy Color, because I was still playing the Pokemon games at the time. So I was very much like, I had my original PlayStation, but I wasn't playing it as much just because of the N64 and because of Pokemon, basically. But I remember, and I think the other thing with me as well is a lot of the hype coming up to the launch of the PlayStation 2 was because of Metal Gear Solid 2. Yes. Or specifically the fact that if you got Zone of Enders, it would come with a demo for Metal Gear Solid 2. And I, as we've documented before, I didn't care about MGS at the time, and I wouldn't say I care about it as much now, but at least have some level of appreciation for it. I didn't care for it at the time, and there was nothing really at that time where a PlayStation 2 was like a necessary purchase for me. But I remember the first game that I played, and I was talking about this earlier on Twitter, was a game called The Bouncer, which I think was a Square Enix game, I want to say. It certainly visually looked like a Square Enix game. And it was like a 3D beat 'em up, so like a kind of Streets of Rage, but in 3D. And I remember at the time, A, being blown away by how it looked, and B, just the fact that it was a beat 'em up in a 3D environment, and I loved Streets of Rage growing up. And I came back to that game about 10 years later, and it didn't age particularly well. It played like trash. It still looked pretty cool for an early PS2 game, but it played like trash.
So,
and that was my earliest memory.
Yeah, it was November 2000, which means I probably got it for Christmas 2001, because I got it with the first PlayStation 2 game I played was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. Oh, hell yeah. I was so happy because I never actually owned the initial Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but I had Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 and probably put in like hundreds and hundreds of hours of my life playing that wonderful video game. So like, you've got a brand new console and the brand new Tony Hawk on it, and I was not disappointed. I played the shit out of that game, probably got that year's FIFA as well, and then Metal Gear Solid 2 launched, I want to say, like the March, kind of April time after that. And yeah, that just absolutely knocked me for six, blew me away, because I was a huge Metal Gear Solid fan at the time. And I think it's weird because when you buy and play stuff when you're younger, and there's something that you love, when there's a sequel or anything that's coming out to follow it up, the level of excitement that you get, like, I almost miss it. Like, there's not many things that get me anywhere near as excited as I was when I was younger, because there was such a paucity of like news. Like, you had to buy a PlayStation magazine or something to read it, because there were really like proto versions of websites like IGN and stuff around at the time, or whatever. On the internet that you would have got your video game news from, like, oh, there's this sort of like blurry image from a game or whatever, it's coming out at this point, and there was all a bit of an element of mystery about it. So like now so much information about a game before it comes out that it's kind of, you're excited, but there's not the same level. But yeah, I remember ripping open Metal Gear Solid 2, just playing the living shit out of that game and absolutely loving every minute.
Yeah, so for me, the whole kind of like sequel that got me hyped was Grand Theft Auto Vice City.
Oh, what a game!
And you can talk about Grand Theft Auto 3, and among the many reasons why the PS2 is looked back so fondly, like you've got that trilogy of games there in GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas, which really, the sandbox genre is just indebted to that series,
of course,
alone. And I remember just the hours that I wasted on GTA 3 and Vice City specifically, just fucking around and, basically playing God mode, creating tanks. And my little sister, who's about 2 years younger than me, so she would have been, I want to say maybe like 9 or 10 at the time, and I was about 12 or 13, and I would just create a bunch of tanks, give the controller to her, and just watch her going around blowing shit up. And I was having the time of my life with it, and it was just a whole new way of playing a video game where, it wasn't a kind of direct objective of go from point A to point B or go from left to right. It was just, well, yeah, this is like the mainline quest that you need to do, but in the meantime, just go and do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah, it was mind-bending. And the thing is, it's the most wrong I've ever been in my life about something. Is I love GTA and GTA 2. When GTA 3 came out and I saw that it wasn't a top-down thing anymore, I was like, oh, they've ruined it. And I seeing what like I sort of thought it was, I was like, oh, they've just made it look like any other game. So I don't want to play this. And I passed it by just through like the stubbornness and arrogance of being like a 14-year-old who 13 maybe, or however old I was, thinking I was right about this. How dare they change my beloved Grand Theft Auto? And then maybe 6 months after it came out, I went around a good friend, Matthew Biggs' house, and he was playing it. And I saw about 2 minutes of the game mark, and I was like, motherfucker, I need to buy this.
And the thing is, if you go back and play like the original GTA now, that fucking thing is impossible to play. Like, the camera is insane.
But there's still a level, because
I have an appreciation
for wasted time.
I have an appreciation for it, but boy, that camera just fucking flings about from left to right. One of my fondest memories with the PS2, obviously, like, between us, a very personal connection. The many, many hours that we wasted on the likes of SSX3
Hell yeah.
and Tony Hawk's, just, trying to one-up each other. And, yeah, like, many times we'd go around each other's houses and we were just trying to kind of outdo each other. And that was combined with the N64 as well, with Mario Kart and whatever else. And yeah, just I always enjoyed that. I remember you guys coming over. I can't remember if it was after, like, way after the PS2 life cycle, but we'd still get Tekken 5 out and we'd still play that. And, we were playing SSX3 for years later.
If we were in the same room right now with my dusty PS2, I would ask if you fancied a game of SSX3.
And I would be offended if you didn't. I think one of the other massive things as well that it has been reported, like, I've been reading a lot of the kind of think pieces about the PS2 today, and they've all brought it up, and it is a fair point that sometimes, I guess, may be overlooked or immediately considered because you just straight away think about the games. But the fact that it had a DVD player,
massive.
And the fact that the PS2 itself wasn't that much more expensive than the DVDs that were out there for sale, which really pissed off Sony, like the actual kind of electronic side. That was a huge thing, and people were talking about the fact that it was the first time that the video game console went from the bedroom to the living room, and I think that is absolutely true. And I think that you see that as well in the fact that you started to see games like Buzz and Guitar Hero as well, that were trying to kind of be, or certainly like buzz in trying to have a more kind of family oriented experience that you could have in the living room. You know, it really bred creativity. And I obviously used my PS2 as a DVD player, and that kind of opened up this whole new way that you could look at a video game console.
I think there are two other factors as well. One is that the competition for Sony of the PS2 was paltry at best, right? Because you had a Dreamcast that they'd kind of rushed out, where they'd eaten such a ton of shit at Sega and the Saturn. So they kind of rushed the Dreamcast out, and it was good, but like it didn't really hit. It didn't really resonate, and it they didn't really have the money at the time to really heavily market it. And
even sponsoring Arsenal couldn't help them.
Even sponsoring Arsenal couldn't help them, though. Even though that gold kit with Dreamcast on it, I hate to say it because I'm far from an Arsenal fan, but it's really fucking cool. So yeah, and they had the Sega on the home shirt as well, didn't they? And then obviously the GameCube wasn't released until a good year and a half in the EU after the PlayStation 2. So it was like, right, so they've got this massive window of a console that's already been out and people know what it's about and it's failed, and a console that hasn't really had any sort of like news or anyone really knowing entirely what's going on with it. And that's kind of just, like way on the horizon. So here we go. Here we've got this beautiful gap for the PS2. And the key thing as well, DVDs, by the way, I'm putting number one. If this was like family fortunes of reasons that I thought the PS2 did do so well, DVDs number one. The big gap between any kind of competition before Xbox came along and before the GameCube and post the Dreamcast. And the third one for me is the fact that you could play PS1 games on it. Because it's just immediate then. You're like, and you could use your PS1 controllers, Mark, even. You could just plug and play PS1 controller straight into it. So it's like, right, all I need to do is get this new system. I don't need to buy any new controllers. I don't think you even needed to buy new memory cards.
No, I think you could still use the original memory cards as well.
You didn't need to buy new games. For the time being, you obviously you would get a new game when it came out. But basically, it would do everything your PS1 did, but better, and it was a DVD player. Like, you just think, like, this is a no-brainer. I need this piece of entertainment equipment in my house.
And the thing is as well, like, you think about the generations either side, and it seems like such an alien concept. Like, you didn't see it from, say, the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo to the N64. You didn't get any of that. You didn't get the backwards compatibility, and then you certainly didn't get it afterwards with, say, the PS3 and the PS4, and the multitude of issues that we had when it came to backwards compatibility and controller accessibility. And it's astonishing that happened there at that time, and then no one kind of figured to do that afterwards and to do it as successfully as Sony did. And you're absolutely right. And the backwards compatibility was a massive thing, because obviously most people still had their back catalogue of games, and there were still so many games from the original PlayStation. You think about the Final Fantasy series alone.
Hell yeah!
That
I've still got
want to keep holding to. Yeah, I'm sure most people do. So yeah, I think that's a point that can't be overlooked. For you, we were talking about this earlier on Twitter, but we can have the conversation here. A top 3 or 4 PlayStation 2 games for you of all time.
Yeah, I think I said on Twitter earlier, Final Fantasy X is just it took everything I loved about the series and put it on a new console, and for the first time you had like the spoken word in the game. The characters spoke, and it just brought everything to life. The graphics were just unbelievable. Like, it didn't matter what console or what generation console Square Enix were working on at the time, they just seemed to bring a level of graphical detail and fidelity and made their games look like no one else. So like, it really stood out. And yeah, it's a fantastic RPG. Still one of my favorite battle systems. Like, it allows you to be really strategic, and I think it's a really interesting story. It feels like a very anime kind of story. It's like this guy who's basically a vision, essentially, he's been transported through like his like dad, who's created this like weird time space rift, because he's inhabited a giant monster. Mark, you're probably rolling your eyes right now.
I actually somewhat know the story of Final Fantasy X because I've started that game, I think, about on 5 separate occasions, and haven't made it past the first hour, but I have a general idea of the story.
But it's like, so you've got the guy who really doesn't know why he's there, doesn't know what he's doing, and then the main character, her purpose is to bring forth this like final summon that will take down this giant beast that is kind of the soul of Tidus, who's the main character's dad, has inhabited. And it's kind of like the whole game is the two of them just really struggling with their own identity. Tidus not knowing why he's there, and then Yuna just like, is this really the right thing to do? Am I willing to kind of sacrifice myself for the cause? So I think that from that perspective of just being really generally a confused teenager and stuff by the time I played it, and having two main characters who didn't really know where they were in the world as well. So I think I kind of connected with it from that point. MGS3, love it, brilliant, like the best self-contained story in any Metal Gear Solid game. Just a very interesting take on the stealth genre, like focusing more on sort of camouflage, taking the map element away, making you be a bit more tactical. Some really cool stuff with survival, some really cool stuff with bosses like that you didn't really have in the previous games, and just generally the look and feel of the game as like a sort of jungle action stealth game, which no one had really done before. And obviously the Snake Eater song that I'm sure you've heard, Mark, is an absolute triumph, and probably maybe my favourite self-contained video game theme song ever.
I mean, one of the best Bond theme songs ever.
It's just like, Hideo Kojima, you can tell he's so singularly obsessed with the sort of James Bondy kind of spy feel, and like every game you can unlock Snake wearing a tuxedo, for instance, which is pretty damn cool. And then I think earlier, did I say SSX3? Because I plowed so much time into that game, and I'm not ashamed of how much time I plowed into it, really, because it's just a fucking fantastic, self-contained, amazing world, and mountains and snowboarding and frustration, but ultimately joy. And I think it's my favorite, probably my favorite action sports game, and I love all of the Tony Hawk games dearly. But those are my 3 that I chose earlier. And having to do a top 3 is difficult. Having to do a top 5 would be hard. A top 10 would be fair, but then we may be here all day with me talking. But what are yours, Mark?
Makes 2 of us, in fairness. Like, I spent some time making my top 10, but I could easily take 5 of those games out and put another 5 in.
Absolutely.
I think without question, like, GTA Vice City is to this day still my favourite Grand Theft Auto game. There's something about the style of GTA that it's so, you can so put it in that Miami Vice setting, and it fits seamlessly. And they've obviously been able to adapt it and put it into like early 90s LA, and everything they did with GTA 4 in a more kind of like metropolitan New York setting. But I don't know, that game drips with personality, and I love the story. And I guess part of it is that the whole rags to riches trope that they go with wasn't completely like burnt out by that point.
No, and I think the thing with Tommy is he just come out of prison, and kind of the thing that I liked about him is that they didn't really humanize him. They kind of just made him like a bit of a maniac. He was a bit of a sort of unhinged, Al Capone in Scarface kind of. Al Capone in Scarface. It's not Al
Try
Capone. Again. Oh dear, that's a terrible thing. Al Pacino. There you go. Absolutely. What am I doing? Al Pacino in Scarface kind of character, and that to me, like, you're not then thinking about like the human element. You're just enjoying it. It's like there's more of a wacky arcade feel to it, and I think the serious route that GTA shifted to, especially with GTA 4, is then what like gives you all of the GTA likes with like wackiness, most notably of course the Saints Row series. So I just think And you know, there's something about that era, Mark, right? With the music and the fashion and everything. Like the 80s has that sort of retro feel. You know, whenever you put a film and you set it in the 80s, you just immediately get color, you get culture, you get sound. And I think GTA Vice City captured that perfectly, right?
Yeah, and it's like, well, I think one of the big appeals with Stranger Things has been that exact thing where it captures that color and tone of the 80s so, vividly. And it has motorbikes, and that was all I wanted from GTA 3.
Dude, I remember when I first got that game, me and our pal Andrew Drewman, the first thing we did was find a motorbike, flipped it on, it was playing 2 Minutes to Midnight by Iron Maiden, and we were just wheeling around the whole of Vice City, or the only bit that we could at the time, because it hadn't fully opened up, with 2 Minutes to Midnight cracking out, and I had myself a ball.
Also, like, I can't really say anything more that you didn't say about SSX3, but to this day, like, one of the most perfect pieces of music that accompanies a game. And I'll be able to talk about this with the other one as well. But, whenever The Bitter End by Placebo comes on and you are fucking bombing it down a mountain, and the way that they dynamically incorporate the music into that game, and how parts of the track will either cut out depending on if you completely wipe out. But like when you nail it and you're flying in the air and the music kind of fades out and then you land like this incredible trick and then the whole track kind of comes back on. There's to this day there are very few things that nails that kind of adrenaline rush and experience like SSX3 does.
Agreed. It felt, and this is a strange thing to say, but it felt like the environment was DJing for you.
Yeah.
When you went through a tunnel, like you got the low end of the track, you got the drums, you got the bass. There was no vocals, there was no guitar. When you went high up in the air, you just got like the high, you got the cymbals, you got the guitar, you got the vocals, and then as you came back down, all of the bass returned to the music. The environment shaped the sound, and it felt, honestly, it did. It felt like it was mixing it for you, and it was perfect.
Yeah, like in terms of sound design, I still think to this day it's one of the best games that does sound design. Specifically.
Yeah. I got shout out my boy DJ Atomic as well.
Yeah. And the fact as well, like the fact that you can go from the top of the mountain all the way down to the bottom in one go if you want. Like how they connect that entire mountain together. I am clamoring. I'm one of I get the whole some people on for HD remakes or the burnt out by HD remakes, but my god, if I could get SSX3 on the Switch in a HD remake, I would be a very happy boy. SSX, the kind of reboot, filled some of that niche on the PS3 for me, but yeah, I could definitely go for a Switch port of SSX3. And then finally, Burnout 3 Takedown. I mean, I enjoyed Burnout 1 and 2, but they definitely feel limited, to say the best. But Burnout 3, just like SSX, got that speed and got that just adrenaline, and unlike other racing games, and by that point there was a real kind of focus on that simulation racer with Gran Turismo that just took things a little bit too seriously. And Burnout just went in the other direction and was just about, speed and, actively just looking to cause as much chaos and as mayhem as possible. And I still think I'll put on Burnout every kind of year or two, and I still just have a blast of it.
There is nothing more satisfying than the takedown mode in Burnout 3, right?
Yeah, and I you know what? Like I was playing Burnout Paradise a bit last year, and I kind of saw what they were going for, but there was something that they didn't quite get with that part of the game compared to Burnout 3.
I really like Burnout Paradise, but it isn't Burnout 3. And at the time when it came out, I bounced off it, and I didn't come back to it until maybe a year or so later, because Burnout 3 just nailed that formula so well that you almost were kind of like, I mean, I wanted something else but more or better or evolved or something like that, and didn't really get it. What we got is arguably, say if Burnout Paradise was your first Burnout game, you probably might prefer it because you kind of have a sort of free exploration. But to me, the most frustrating thing to this day with that game is having to constantly check the map, because there's no real good map options for where you are unless you learn the city inside and out, which is pretty difficult because unlike a GTA game, it doesn't have like great features, especially when you're in the downtown mode of really letting you know where you are. But yeah, Burnout 3, having everything just be self-contained, the tracks be self-contained, the crash mode be self-contained, I actually preferred it. It's one of the few times where I prefer it to a full open world. So yeah, what a game. Definitely, that's in my top 10. As I say, it might crack my top 5. It could get emotional if I was thinking about a whole... I could do a top 25 in all honesty, but yeah.
Any left field choices, anything a little bit out there? Because like the PS2 back catalogue is so friggin' massive. That, you know, today I was seeing people talking about their favorite games, and I was hearing of games that I've never heard of or I knew nothing about. So I have a few, but I was wondering if you have any kind of left field choices that might not be most apparent for a top 10 or a top 20.
I don't know if they're left field. I could do a few quick hitters. The Simpsons Hit and Run, I love.
Yes.
The Simpsons, basically the Simpsons GTA. So I mean, how does it get any better than that?
You know, I'm surprised they never did a South Park version of that. It seemed so...
But it kind of...
No, it was terrible.
Wasn't good. It was on the N64, right? Where there was like the main bad guys in it were the turkeys and stuff.
Yeah, no, that was just... No, let's never talk of that game. It was terrible.
It wasn't great. I loved Tekken Tag Tournament because I was a huge mark for Tekken on a PlayStation, and it was like, oh, I get 2 people, brilliant. I can have Paul Phoenix, and I can have Laura as well, amazing.
More importantly, it had the Tekken Bowl mode, which was another pastime of ours that we wasted way too many hours on.
Yeah, I agree, but it was it's just a very fun arcadey Tekken game. Yeah. And then finally, there's a few things popping around my head. Obviously, like I liked all of the, you know, the SmackDown series of wrestling games. I liked quite a lot. Obviously, very into all of the Tony Hawk games, but we've done a bit on it. I managed to get it over eventually, but Aggressive Inline to this day is still my favorite, completely under the radar extreme sports game, and it's just one of those ones that honestly doesn't get the love that it deserves. And I think to a lot of people, if I said Aggressive Inline, they would say that was an acceptable left field choice. To this podcast, maybe not, if you're a regular listener and you heard me gush for half an hour about it, but like that to me launched the open world extreme sports game even before Tony Hawk was doing it. So yeah, fucking cool. Love that game. What about you, Mark? Have you got anything?
So the original Jak and Daxter.
Yeah, great game.
Yeah, I really liked. I don't know. I guess that game was I guess you could say to a certain degree, open world. You could kind of go where you want, obviously following the linear path, but you could come backtrack and forth and whatever. And just that world was just a fun world to explore. And I guess it was kind of like the evolution for me from like the Crash Bandicoot series, where that was more kind of focused on going up and down or left and right. But you had that kind of over the shoulder camera. Yeah, it just, I don't know. There was something about the game that always kind of gravitated towards me, and I always would come back to it every now and again. I guess not so left field, but Devil May Cry.
Yeah.
I think that original still, like the style and the swag that game has, and the combat, just it completely grabbed me. And it was kind of my go-to from Capcom, that like it was the other side, the other coin to Resident Evil, where I didn't kind of gravitate towards them because I wasn't a horror guy, but it took elements of that but went more in the kind of action fantasy realm that I could definitely gravitate towards. And I always got on board with that.
Silent Hill 2, by the way. That if we were to want to talk about horror game on the PlayStation 2.
Well, I mean, if Dave was here, he would have already been gushing about it till
one hell of a definitely game.
Yeah, and Max Payne.
Did that originate on the PC? I played that on the PC. I never actually played it.
Yeah, I don't think it's originally a PS2 game. It's kind of like how a bunch of people played Half-Life 2, Half-Life the original on the PlayStation 2 first before the PC.
Sure.
And I think it's the same case with Max Payne as well. But that's where I came into it, and you know, bullet time and just that film noir style. I'd never played anything like it, and there are still a few games. There are a lot of games that took that bullet time idea. There are a few games that had a kind of griminess to them, I guess, that Max Payne had.
Yeah. I'm just going to say like 3 more titles. Bully, right?
Yeah, Bully, of course.
Great game. Shadow of the Colossus, which has just recently
Naturally,
received.
I think you would see that on a lot of top 3 lists.
Yeah, I mean it's art
Yeah.
completely as video games and stuff. And Final Fantasy 12 because it got released and then the PS3 came out and it kind of was buried, and again has recently been given the remake treatment for the PS4, and people are like, oh shit, this is actually a fucking good Final Fantasy game. The story ain't up to much, but the game is fun as hell to play. So yeah, I could talk about the PS2 literally all day. Maybe I think it is my favorite console, but you know what's running it real close is the Switch at the moment. So
Well, in the meantime, speaking about Final Fantasy, they just went and they shadow dropped a demo for Final Fantasy VII, the remaster, on Monday morning, which for everyone in the GMT time zone, they were furious because they knew that not only would they have to wait till they got home, they would also then have to wait for the 7.8 gigs of that demo to download. And if anyone knows anything about the PS4 download speeds, they're not great. Fortunately for me, my girlfriend was still in bed, so I was like, hey, would you mind downloading this for me for when I get home?
I mean, that's what relationships are
That
about.
is what relationships are about. So it's
Shout
the least
out
she can
Maria,
do.
big time.
It's the least she can do because she's been playing the hell out of Tetris Effect for the last couple of weeks.
I see. Oh god, she hates me as well then. Oh dear.
I mean, let's jump right into it. The context that I always give, if anyone's heard this show before, I didn't grow up loving Final Fantasy. It took me a few years after. I didn't play Final Fantasy VII properly till I was about 22, 23 on the PS Vita. That was my way that I came into it. But I definitely like Final Fantasy VII, and it's definitely a game that I can see why it gets the love and the reverence it does. You, Jack, you definitely grew up playing this game and have a love and fondness for it, to say the least.
Yeah, I loved the Final Fantasy series from top to tail. FF7 was the first one I really played, in line with a lot of kids, you know, who were kind of sort of 10, 11 when it came out. I don't know if it kick-started my sort of pseudo-weebiness of liking a lot of Japanese things. I don't know if it was Final Fantasy that kind of brought that out, but I feel like it was a massive contributor to that, because I'm like, wow, wonder what else is cool from Japan that I can sink my teeth into. And then you find Miyazaki, and then it's just you
just go from there.
Yeah, you just go full weeb at that point.
Let's just jump straight into it then. Like, what do you think? I mean, you are the one out of the two of us that I think is going to be more giving the hot takes. I do have certain things to say, but I'm really curious to see what you think about it, considering you're just more indebted to this game than I am.
I mean, first of all, off the bat, it looks incredible. It just looks amazing. Like, the city is just every bit as sort of like dirty, industrial kind of, everything you wanted it to be, everything you sort of read into what you were thinking when you were kind of growing up and you had like barely the graphics, like the train pulling up and stuff like that. That's like a big moment. That's the start of the Final Fantasy VII, and I just thought they've absolutely nailed it with the way that it looks. I mean, Cloud's hair is every bit as ridiculous as you would expect it to look like in a higher resolution graphics. And I just think, like, just from a purely look and feel point of view, I do feel immediately home in the game. Obviously it's a very limited sample size, but it did get me very excited to play the actual game. I think pretty much any time you dig into a Final Fantasy game, the tough part is always learning the combat system. So it's kind of like taken a little bit from Final Fantasy 15 with the combat system and a kind of character switch, like with you and Barrett and stuff. By the way, how cool is Barrett in the game? He's exactly as fucking surly and badass as I would expect him to be, right? Like, he just seems really cool.
He's very much the yin to Cloud's yang, because Cloud, for me, very much, there's a lot of that 90s anime tortured soul character where there's a lot of, like, not actually saying anything when someone says something, and kind of like, and it's fucking infuriating, where Barrett's just, big and bold and yeah, he's a lot more tolerable.
he's having none of Cloud's shit in this. I just thought, like, immediately thinking to myself, like, I love how they've just made him like this fucking, because you're just reading text, aren't you? So you can kind of, you can read a tone in, but I guess I never really read in the tone that him just basically like, this guy, just shut the fuck up and carry on running and come and help me out fighting off these soldiers, please. That's kind of the way he is in the game. So yeah, I love it. I love their interactions and stuff. The only thing for me that I find difficult is, just it will take a while, I think, to get used to the way the battle system is, because obviously Final Fantasy VII, the original game, is like a very old school JRPG of, sort of turn-based combat. You equip this, equip that kind of thing, and this is a lot more sort of like, it's like a hybridized version, isn't it, of like, it is a bit turn-based, but then, because you've got like certain amounts of time before attacks and stuff, and you do set things up, but there is a lot more of an active battle system. And I don't know how I feel about that, but I feel like, do we think the old JRPG battle things are so outdated at this point that they kind of can't do that anymore?
So, this fucking thing, right? This is where my hot takes come in. The first time that I encountered this hybrid of elements of the original or old school turn-based combat system and a more kind of Twitch action style combat was in Ni no Kuni, and I really didn't like it in Ni no Kuni. I felt like it was just, I had too many systems that I had to juggle between, and I had too many different moving parts I had to work with, and I really, like, at the time was just like, just give me one or the other. And the thing about this game in particular, and specifically when playing Cloud, is that in the kind of new mode, if you will, he has this big sword and you can hammer square and you can, slash and hack and whatever. And in my mind, I want to be able to jump. It's just, I keep pressing X thinking that I should be able to jump and I can't do it. And B, I'm just waiting to, I feel like I should just have more options in terms of this being like a hack and slash game. Just because, I don't get it when I'm playing as Barrett, but with Cloud specifically I do. And it'll be interesting to see how I fare with other characters. And between that and between constantly going into the menu to go and stock up on potions because the fucking Scorpion was just destroying me, it really kept taking me out of the action where, the work that goes into and, like, just the cinematics and the presentation of the action, certainly when things get really lively. I don't want to be faffing around in the menus picking spells and potions and whatnot, and I really don't like that hybrid. Now, from what I understand, there's going to be an option in the full release where you can kind of just do one or the other if you want to, and I'll be curious to see like how that goes and if I kind of lean more towards one or the other. But that, just as it is currently, it's just not doing it for me.
Yeah, I get it. The thing that I find hard, and it was something that kind of irritated me in Final Fantasy 15, because like you said about, just being absolutely messed up by a Scorpion, there is an option to dodge, and you can, like, it's about timing, and you can, like, parry attacks and dodge attacks. And it's something that I really don't like having to think about in a Final Fantasy game. Like, I don't want to sit there and be constantly having a time pressing a dodge button to then go and set up attacks and stuff. But then that just comes down to a preference. I just think, like, the whole reactor thing and just the way Midgar looks and everything like that is enough for me to be still extremely excited about what this game can be. And, part of me hopes that whatever the feedback is online, whatever the buzz is online about the way that the battle system works, might prompt them to either change it, or then, as you say, if there are then options in the game to either switch it from like a live to or a turn-based battle. I think that would be pretty cool. But yeah,
well, the game has gone gold now, so I don't think we'll be seeing any kind of radical wholesale changes to the system at this point.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think as well, like, I always have this issue with over-the-shoulder third-person games where I always want the camera to be about another 10 feet back from where it is on the character. And I imagine a lot of this is due to you only want the camera to show so much on the screen at one time, because otherwise the game it has too much. It has to try it, and too much information it has to try and present.
Sure.
And certainly with a game like this Final Fantasy VII Remaster, like between all the particle effects that appear on the screen and just the sheer just how it looks, there's only so much they can have on the screen. So I get that, but because of that, the issue that you run into, certainly with, even though this isn't a hack and slash, but just the way that the kind of new school combat is, you constantly run into the issue that when you have more than 2 enemies on the screen, half the time you can't see all the enemies that you want to see, and you'll get blindsided by attack from behind or to the left of you. And you had games like Zelda that got around this with the Z targeting to give you a lot more kind of spatial awareness, or you're playing an actual hack and slash game where just the kind of range of your attacks were just a lot more that you couldn't really ever get blindsided because just how much was going on. And I'm really curious to see how when this game gets particularly more challenging later on and you have enemies on the screen, like I'm curious to see what will be like the max amount of enemies you'll ever see at one time, because I just don't think that what there is at the moment, if you have more than say like 4 or 5, and certainly if they're kind of more like stronger enemies, I just don't see the fun in that. I see the challenge in it, but I don't see the fun in it.
Yeah, and then that comes to it just being like I was saying about it, just being a dodge fest where you're then just constantly trying to evade attacks.
Exactly.
Before you can get any attacks off yourself. But then at that point, when things do get a bit thick and fast, you would think maybe, well, I've got 3 members of my party at that point, so then maybe that they're the ones that can take care of X amount of potential enemies.
Yeah, I guess you'd have like Barrett with his gun being more kind of for like crowd control and stuff. So I guess there could be that tactic. That
it did improve when you got Barrett, when you had Barrett and Cloud fighting at the same time, and you could switch back and forth. Like I quite liked using Barrett more than using Cloud, and I think that was a bit better at that point. So I think that will improve it. Again, I think the sort of streets of Midgar are very claustrophobic as well, Mark. So like what you're saying about the camera being tight, I think when you get into different environments, maybe, I know they say that the majority of the first chapter, if not all of the first chapter, is kind of based just in Midgar, but I think that for that point there might be more open environments for you to kind of work with, and it might not feel as reined in, and then maybe if they're doing like extra parts or whatever, it'll kind of feel a bit better when you have more of a world around you, more of an adventure to it maybe. But yeah, it's still enough to get me really excited. Like, I mean, it would have to be pretty bad for me not to be excited.
Yeah, I like the cinematics and the presentation alone makes me want to see just what that game looks like, and I'm thinking back to certain scenes in Midgar and later on in the game, and I'm thinking about what they're going to look like based off of what we got in this 90-minute demo. And absolutely, like I want to see what they do. And the one thing I guess we didn't mention is the soundtrack and the kind of modernization of that soundtrack is like even for me only playing through that game once, a lot of that soundtrack is still very much burned in my brain. And obviously I'm pretty sure we all want to hear what One Winged Angel will sound like in 2020.
The soundtrack is a masterpiece, and I think in the demo you kind of got a nice little bit of a preview of what it's going to be, but because all of the demo is just pure action and pure frantic encounters, I think it'd be quite nice to get like a dissection of like some of the calmer moments of the soundtrack, some of the like the golden sources of this world kind of, and just hearing all of those notes and evocative sounds and swells of music again. Yamatsu's just a genius composer, so it's cool that somebody's kind of have a modern take on his original soundtrack. So yeah, just excited, mate, very excited, honestly, can't wait.
I have been playing over the last week or so. Last week they dropped the Mega Man Zero collection for I think all platforms, but I've been playing it on the Switch.
How many Mega Man games have you completed?
So, what, out of this collection so far,
Out
or
of
in
this
general?
collection so far, yeah.
Okay, so there's 6 of them. I only completed the first one yesterday
Okay.
because let me tell you, these games do not fuck about.
I have seen you play Mega Man, and I have seen the rage that induces, my friend.
So I never played the Zero collection, partly because I had a Game Boy Advance, but I didn't have a lot of games on my Game Boy Advance, and I never got around to the Zero collection because I think it just, when you get into like Mega Man 5 and Mega Man 6, you're kind of spinning the wheel at that point.
Yeah, it's like Police Academy movies, there's way more than you think there is.
I'd never made the comparison, but yes, I guess that is somewhat apt. And I also even with the Mega Man X series, I've only played the first couple. So, one of the things when I start streaming that I want to do is I want to go through basically Mega Man 1 to 11, where I've played all those 11, and then do the X series, which I think is 8 of them, and then do the Zero series, which I think is 6 of them.
Okay, so you want people to watch you have a meltdown?
Yeah, pretty much. One of the things that I was reading about from someone who'd played through them on Twitter, it was like basically if you play the X series, it's a little bit like that, but the bosses are by and large they're a lot more of a challenge. And one of the things that I'd liked about the collection series that they've done that I remembered with the I think they did. I can't remember which collection series, but they had like save states basically, or certainly if you were playing on the, if you ever played them on the 3DS, there was a save state feature. So if you got to a certain point, you could just save state and then carry on from there. Because the Mega Man games are very unforgiving for checkpoints. They basically don't exist. There's usually like one kind of midway checkpoint in the level. There's the checkpoint which is just before the boss, and that's it. And they're also very unforgiving when it comes to lives. And usually what would happen is if you died, you go back to the checkpoint up until the point that you run out of lives, and then you would just have to start that level all over again. And usually a lot of the time, by the time you got to the boss, you were already like at maybe 2 points of health back. So you've already lost a life. They don't fuck around. And so I came into this kind of thinking about that, and I quickly realized that if I wanted to get through this series in any time soon, the checkpoint feature that they have is they basically added more checkpoints throughout the level. They're a lot more forgiving with it. So it's kind of weird. They've got like the actual in-game checkpoint that was in the original series, which was just basically after each level you could save your game at that point, but then there were, in this remake, they've put kind of in-game checkpoints within the levels as well, but that means you kind of have to remember what your last save point was, because sometimes you'd load up the game and you'd load from the wrong save point, and it would take you to like a thing that you'd done 10 minutes ago or whatever.
Yeah, so you have to be smart with your save scum.
It's not as bad as that. I mean, for the most part, I just would work off of the kind of new checkpoints. And the best thing about that as well is with the new checkpoints, they don't take into account lives, basically. So, it definitely reduces the difficulty, but the level design is challenging enough, and particularly the bosses are challenging enough that you kind of don't care about the fact that the whole concept of lives is made redundant. And I kind of just treated the game at this point like a Mega Man or Rayman Origins, where like death will happen. Death is just a part of the game, and you just go with the trial and error of trying to take down the bosses. Because Lord Almighty, if I tried to complete that game on 3 lives, it would never have happened. But the bosses, definitely, they are. So one of the things that happened with I can't remember where in the X series, I think like specific bosses had it, but certainly with this game that I've noticed, when you get to the boss, so usually, like, I don't know what your knowledge or history with Mega Man is, but you get to the end of the level and you'd have a boss, and certainly in the original Mega Man series, you would just be in kind of like the one confined square area. The screen would never scroll at all, so you knew exactly where the boss was at all times, and you just kind of had to figure out their AI patterns to take them down.
Traditional like arcade platform boss fight for
pretty much. What they do, certainly with the Zero series, is that the area that you fight in is a hell of a lot bigger, and depending on which boss you're taking on, would kind of determine how wide the area of the environment you would be fighting in. And now for some of those bosses that was fine, because some of them, like there's one like a basically a massive elephant who takes up most of the screen, and you can kind of see him coming from a mile away, and his attacks aren't too bad. But certainly towards the end of the game, like the final boss in his first stage, a lot of the time you can't see where he's coming from off the screen. And actually there's another boss as well that it's impossible to track them, and they just come flying out of nowhere, and it's that kind of like instant reaction you need to do, where Zero has like a dash which will dash you forward, and if you can nail it, most of the time you'll avoid the boss, but you have to be, it's sudden, you know, it's like instincts that you have to avoid those attacks. And it's one of those things again where it's a trial and error, that every time you die you learn something different or something new about the attack pattern. And it's one of the things that I like about that series, and I like about games, specifically Cuphead. You know, Cuphead is the prime modern example where every time you take on a boss, you'll probably die like the first 30 or 40 times, but each time you learn something new about a specific pattern. And, you know, a boss may only have like 3 attack patterns that it works, but there are like different intricacies to it where, you know, maybe the boss only attacks you after a certain amount of time, or maybe it attacks you depending on what you do, which is definitely the case with some Mega Man bosses. And so I love that kind of idea of, you know, death is an absolute, but it's not the end, and you learn from it each time. And certainly towards the end of the game, I was just fucking losing my mind, because the final boss is split into 2 stages, and there's no like in-game checkpoint between those 2 stages, so you basically have to take on kind of 2 bosses in one go. And I got to the point that I got so stuck on his final form that I had to go back. And the thing that Mega Man games do is that after you get to like towards the end of the game, you'll do like a boss rush where you'll take on the 8 bosses from the game, kind of one after the other, though there'll be like a kind of like a rest point between each one, but you effectively take on one after the other. And I got to the final boss of the game, but I had no like health packs, and you can have 3 health packs, and there are different kind of upgrades as well, and I had none. And I realized that like maybe eventually I would get to the point where I could take him on, but it just wasn't happening. But the last chance that I had to get those health packs was before the 8 bosses, so I basically went, fuck it, I'll go and do the 8 bosses again so I can get my 3 health packs, which meant I had to do the 8 bosses without using any of those health packs, and then take on the final boss again. And then about 3 hours later, I finally got there. And I had a great time with it. I loved it, because I'm a sick man.
I was going to say that sounds sadistic to me. I like when you were talking about Cuphead, and you were just like, you know, before you beat a boss, you might die 20 or 30 times. And like my head just went into my hands, like, what, people enjoy that? That sounds miserable for me.
Yeah, I've never claimed to be normal. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I'm glad I'm coming to this series. One of the problems that I noticed with the X games, and certainly into the Zero games by the looks of it, is they really try to kind of hammer home this story that they're trying to tell. Like the original Mega Man games, it's like, look, there's Mega Man, there's Dr. Wily, he wants to take over the world, sure, whatever. You know, it's the Nintendo games, you don't really do story.
Wasn't there a game where like all the bosses were named after, was it like seasons or something?
There was the Game Boy games, they had them where they were named after planets.
Yeah. That was it.
But so with this one, and like it's kind of started with Mega Man X, and it carries over to this because this is like a spin-off series, and there's this whole thing about replicants and androids, and replicants that turn into mavericks that are the bad androids, and there's this kind of there's elements of fascism, I guess, in there, and genocide, and it's, you know, it really tries to go with some heavy-handed stuff, but it's a fucking Mega Man game, for crying out loud. And the problem that you run into with these types of games, and certainly for me, is there'll be like 5 minutes of text and conversation, and I'm just hammering the A buttons. Like, I want to get to the bit where I do the platforming. I don't care about this story. And that's probably on me, and I guess I should at least try and appreciate that they're trying to tell this story, but it's so... It gets so... Because the Mega Man games, like the design of them, it's very Japanese, it's very anime, I kind of lose interest pretty quickly. And we've seen with Celeste, it's possible to do that type of game and tell a story and get kind of investment in it. But I don't know. I was getting flashbacks of bad 90s anime when I was going through going through the first of them. But the platforming is awesome, so that's all I care about.
I don't sit around and think about, you know what I think is going to win best story of the year is whatever Mega Man game comes out.
Honestly, you go through the X series and the Zero series and you're just like, okay, someone sat down and watched Blade Runner at some point and went, all right, I know, let's bolt this onto Mega Man, and that's basically what it is.
Yeah, that's not what I'd be looking for a Mega Man experience. So yeah, fair enough. But as long as the platforming is fun and
top choice, top
appealing. Drop. It's appealing to the madman within you who wants to get it absolutely spot on. So yeah.
All right, let's spend just a few minutes, I guess. We'll talk about what we've been watching, because I know you watched Dark Waters, and I haven't seen it yet, and I want to see it, and I want to know if it's as good as I think it is.
Okay, so is it as good as you think it is? How good do you think it is?
I'm going for a solid 4 out of 5. You know, when I go to Letterboxd afterwards, I'm thinking this is going to be at least a 4-star rating.
It is that.
Excellent.
I would definitely give it a 4 out of 5 or an 8 out of 10 or a 80 out of 100 or whatever you want to say. Just on the strength of Mark Ruffalo's performance alone. But it's a very well acted movie. It's a very compelling movie. It's a movie where despite there not being, I mean, you watch a lot of films that are kind of about situations, and you think sometimes that they're like, okay, there's not a lot of kind of character development in this or whatever, but there's not an awful lot of development with Mark Ruffalo, really. It's a lot of him just trying to figure out what's going on with this situation. So like Anne Hathaway is in the movie, and I think it's probably one of the easiest paychecks she's ever got in her life, because she's just kind of there. She's his suffering wife. But yeah, Mark Ruffalo, the performance and his reactions to the situation that he is in, and the narrative of the story is enough to carry it. And if you don't really know a lot about it, Mark, I suggest just doing no research whatsoever. And it is actually a pretty frightening story about I feel like I've seen, let's say, 4 or 5 movies in the last year just about legal system in America and corporations in America just being absolutely shocking.
Is it? I'm guessing you're talking about the likes of Official Secrets and Just Mercy.
Yeah, there's Just Mercy. There's a couple, and you just think, oh god, fuck. And then you see things like Making a Murderer. When They See Us on Netflix is a huge tick piece for anybody. I would go and watch that and heavily recommend that. But yeah, so Dark Waters, the very basic story is a man. So Mark Ruffalo is from West Virginia. That's where he kind of grew up. That's where his grandparents and stuff are from. And a guy who's a local farmer comes to him and he says, you know, there's a new landfill that's opened up, and they said there's no chemicals in there, but there definitely is because they've been killing all my cows. And at first he's kind of like, I don't know if I want to get involved in this, because he is a lawyer who defends chemical companies, basically. He's there to protect chemical companies. And a massive chemical company in this movie, DuPont, are kind of being wooed as potential clients for this firm. So initially he's like, do I really want to do this? And as things develop during the movie, you find that he very much does want to do this. And it's frightening. It's a frightening story. It's a very depressing movie in what you find out about and what actually happened and the process of it all. But it is kind of essential watching, I think, just to see kind of what if people are left open to just kind of do what they want and make their own rules. It's amazing that lengths that corporations will go to just not give a shit about the welfare of the people that they're trying, in a way that they're trying to help with. You know, it's a lot about the production of Teflon, you know, just for non-stick coating on pans. But if the price for non-stick coating on pans is lots of people getting horrifying cancers, then I don't feel like that's a price worth paying. So yeah, it's a great movie. It's a depressing topic. It's a Mark Ruffalo masterclass. It's at least 4 out of 5 stars.
All right, I'm going to put that on my list of films to see at some point.
And Dear God, watch When They See Us. Oh my God, that is that's a fantastic. It's a 4-parter on Netflix. It's about a bunch of boys from New York who get caught up in something and then basically blamed for an assault of a woman, and that they absolutely didn't do, even at like the age of 14s and 15s. So yeah, that's a big thumbs up as well if you got a Netflix account.
I do, where I've been watching Sherlock, which I never watched first time around. So Maria had, and she loves Benedict Cumberbatch, and
it's hard not to.
He's
pretty fantastic.
He really is, and I was like, all right, we'll sit down and watch this. And I don't really have like any investment to Sherlock in any form or fashion. But I figured she likes it, so we'll sit down. And I've watched up until, I haven't done the last episode of series 3. I'm told series 4 is terrible, so maybe I'll avoid that. But like for these first 3 series up until this last episode, which is the one where John Watson gets married, I think the show is incredible. I'm absolutely loving it. I love the way that they incorporate imagery, and you kind of see what Sherlock is thinking in his mind at times. I love the interaction between Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Sheen. Like, I love those two characters. Like, I love the way they act together. Sorry, not Martin Sheen, Martin Freeman. And I think those two have incredible chemistry. I love all the other characters as well, and I think it's a very genuinely like a laugh out loud show at times. And how Sherlock goes between showing elements of humanity but also just being a complete sociopath. Like, I love the oscillation of that, and I think you really kind of see that in the wedding episode, where he has to give this best man speech, and he kind of goes between giving these real heart-touching moments and just, you know, the Sherlock that we know, and then how they incorporate a kind of murder case into that as well. Like, I could be here for a while talking about it, and I don't want to take too much time because this show is quite old at this point, but Sherlock is really good.
How good is Andrew Scott as Moriarty, by the way?
Oh yeah, the first time I ever saw Andrew Scott in anything was in Spectre. And
okay, yeah.
And, you know, after coming back and seeing this, I was like, yeah, I can see how he got that part in Spectre now.
Yeah, because he's incredible. He's also really good in Fleabag, which is a high recommend for anyone who hasn't seen it. But I think at this point, pretty much everyone's seen Fleabag.
And he was very good in that episode of Black Mirror.
Yes, he was. He's fantastic. The whole season 2, I think, is a high point of the show, because the Reichenbach 4 episode, isn't it, is the last episode where they're on the rooftop. That whole scene, like, I mean, I'm sort of like on tenterhooks while those two are up there just dueling it out. Like, these two, like, one person who just is, because he's a sociopath and he's a very intelligent man, he's kind of emotionally detached, and there's another person who's there who's just completely singularly obsessed and just emotionally unstable, and it just is a really interesting contrast of characters. And I think that they couldn't really have had... There's not too many better actors, I think, out there at the moment they had playing those roles. So to me, the show kind of drastically weakened when we lost Moriarty. I wasn't as bought in. I think they tried to then make the story or make it more about the relationship between Holmes and Watson, which, don't get me wrong, is very interesting, but I feel like the decision to get rid of Moriarty was made far too quickly. And the only other real high spot as like a sort of foil, I think, for Sherlock is episode 2 of season 4 is great because Toby Jones is in it, Mark. And Toby Jones is an absolute, just horrific, chewing the scenery, evil rich bastard. So you will greatly appreciate that. He's just horrible. He's got these horrible teeth, and he's just a very unpleasant man. You actually feel your skin crawling when he's on the screen a lot of the time in that episode. So yeah, the last episode of the last series 4 it's either like spectacular or absolute nonsense, and I can't wait to find out whether you find it spectacular or absolute nonsense, because it walks a tightrope all the way through the episode. So yeah, you'll have to let me know what you think. But I enjoyed Sherlock. It's over the top, it's schlocky, but it's a lot of good actors and that solid source material, really solid.
Yeah,
source
and I think
material.
the other thing as well is it's one of those things where it could so easily be too clever for its own good, and it manages to straddle that line very, like on a very thin line. But I don't think it ever
doesn't
goes
disappear
over
up its own.
No,
arse,
it doesn't. But it could very easily. But again, I guess because of the source material it's working with, and kind of putting that modern contemporary spin on it, yeah, I think it does it very, very well.
Do you know what's awful is is the John C. Reilly, Will Ferrell, Holmes and Watson movie?
Never seen it, and I've actually never seen the Robert Downey Jr. ones either.
Oh, the Robert Downey Jr. ones are very good. I've got nothing bad to say about those, just because it's Robert Downey Jr. and despite not being able to save Doolittle,
yeah, I was going to say,
I definitely don't blame him for.
He definitely can't do a Welsh accent. I know that fucking much.
The Sherlock movies with RDJ are great, and it is just very much him being like the singular leading man that he can be in the right scenario, basically. So yeah, I would recommend watching those. I would recommend just watching how absolutely effing terrible the Holmes and Watson John C. Reilly, because John C. Reilly and Will Ferrell, like Step Brothers, is a classic to me of comedy, because I mean it's so brain dead that you think this is actually just pastiche at this point of people, but Holmes and Watson's just like, yeah, it's terrible. There's like a 2-minute scene of people vomiting. There's like a 5-minute scene of Will Ferrell jumping onto a marrow. It's just absolute nonsense.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you've got me thinking about Doolittle now, and I thought I'd kind of erased that from my memory, but it's all coming back to me. And what was that fucking thing about? Anyway,
let's move swiftly
on, please.
Right.
You got one other thing to talk about that you've seen or been watching?
Yes, and it is season 5 now of Better Call Saul. So, Mark, I don't know if you've ever seen Breaking Bad.
No.
But I feel like it's almost parody at this point of people telling you that Breaking Bad is one of the best shows ever and you should absolutely watch it.
Yeah,
and you're a fool and a clown. And it's a sort of shit that if I hadn't seen Breaking Bad, if people were telling me this, I'm like, I don't want to watch this show, just because all the people that seem to tell me to watch it are so smug and self-satisfied about it. It's kind of like the Rick and Morty thing, where it's like, I love Rick and Morty, but Rick and Morty fans are horrible.
Yeah, it's that, The Sopranos and The Wire are like the 3 TV shows I think about where just anyone that's watched it will declare it is the greatest thing that they've ever seen, and maybe they are. And I don't know, I'm really like, when it comes to watching TV in particular, and you know this, like I'm terrible for watching TV shows. I don't sit down and watch them because I'll end up just playing games or watching YouTube stuff. I just don't sit down and watch TV. It's never been my go-to. Like the idea of watching 84 series of Game of Thrones, I'm good, thanks. I'm good.
Yeah, that's not quite 80. Do you know, with Game of Thrones, just go on YouTube, and if there's like a fucking 20-25 minute of Peter Dinklage's scenes in Game of Thrones, just watch that and it'll probably make you want to watch it, because he's... Oh my boy, what Tyrion, just with a sharp razor tongue. Anyway, so Breaking Bad, I have to say it, Mark. I just want to get it out of the way so I don't become that guy. It is unbelievable. It is a masterpiece. I'm not gonna say it's the best this, that, or the other ever, but it is fantastic. So when I heard they were doing Better Call Saul, I was like, oh, because I mean, I don't know. I love Bob Odenkirk. I think he's incredible. One of the most underrated sketch shows of all time is Mr. Show with Bob and Dave, him and David Cross, aka the guy that says "Juicy Juice" at the start of the Strokes video for you, Mark, as a reference. Like, he's good in the show, he's very good, but can he carry an entire series? And as you can tell from the fact that we're at season 5 now, Mark, turns out he can carry an entire series. This show is like, so Breaking Bad, it was kind of one of those shows that just escalated. The situations got more and more perilous, and the show actually carried that pace. Better Call Saul was like a considered journey, a character study, an understanding of how this man became this sort of parody of a sort of shyster kind of lawyer who, it really has no interest in practicing law correctly and is just there to make money and sort of serve criminals. And it's kind of heartbreaking because it's been up to this point, a real emotional breakdown of why he is the way he is and his relationships. And it's just an acting clinic. Bob Odenkirk, Rhea Seehorn, and Michael McKean, who is sadly no longer in the series for reasons I'm not going to go into, because I want people to watch it. It's incredible, and they managed to find the right balance of keeping you interested and giving you that little bit of action every now and then, that little hit to just kind of keep a Breaking Bad fan on. And season 5 so far, the first 3 episodes are out, and they've been so good, and they've reached back into the sort of Breaking Bad quiver gently, like, so if it's a spin-off of a series that everybody loves, there's always the temptation to just immediately bring in like the big guns, bring in the Bryan Cranstons of this world and get them straight into the show. But they haven't done that. What they've done is they've gradually sort of brought in various characters who were around the fringes of Breaking Bad as the season went on, and just deployed them into the show and done it so well. And the latest being Hank, who plays Walter White's brother-in-law in there, amazingly played by Dean Norris. So his first appearance in the show, the latest episode, and it kind of feels like every time a Breaking Bad character comes in and they're sort of accepted, and they do it so naturally, and it's just like, seeing an old relative or an old friend just appearing in the show, even if you know what happens to them and you know that it might not end the right way, or it might end well for them depending on how the show went. Basically, it ended pretty badly for everyone who was in the show regardless. But yeah, it's just class, a really classy show. And it's one of those things, you haven't got to have seen Breaking Bad to watch this show. You don't. In fact, if you watch it, it will then make you go and want to see Breaking Bad probably afterwards. But the best acted show on television, or in television at the moment, by far, I think is Better Call Saul. Rhea Seehorn and Bob Odenkirk put on a fucking clinic on a weekly basis. So if you ain't on this and you like Breaking Bad especially, you should be digesting every second of it, because I think there's only maybe one more series left after that.
I think the thing with Breaking Bad is that, from what I know about the show, it sounds just like a real kind of something that will reduce me to just an anxious mess. And it's why,
there is an element of that,
and
yes.
It's why I've not seen Uncut Gems, because I feel like that show would just give me a full-on fucking panic attack.
Yeah, you do definitely feel the weight of the burden and Uncut Gems of Adam Sandler's predicament and how he's got himself into it. But the interesting transition is you feel anxiety and you feel deeply for the character of Walter White in the first series, kind of second series. But then as the show goes on, the anxiety of the show is removed, and the transformation of this guy from somebody who's really lost, because it starts, the first episode, he's been diagnosed with cancer essentially, so that's hanging over him the whole time anyway. But it transitions away from that, and it's a man who just completely becomes this like self-obsessed, just nasty, disgusting, psychopathic human being who you just wonder how. You watch an episode of Series 1 and then watch an episode of Series 5, and you've got like a maudlin, sorry for himself, browbeaten chemistry teacher turning into like the biggest evil drug kingpin. And the genius of the show, Mark, is that it never feels juddery when they're doing that transition. So yeah, that anxiety element is there in the first series or so. So yeah, if it's hard to get through that, I get it, but it is worth it in the long run, and it is a good show. And yeah, I'm not going to be like hitting you over the head with it over and over again, but check it out one day. And if you can't be asked, you can't be asked.
I'm sure Maria will watch it, and then in 2 years' time, I'll get to it. We should end this episode talking a little bit about we started the show talking about the coronavirus, and we'll end talking about it. People were kind of wondering about what was going to happen with certain events, and in particular GDC, which is really, It is one of the biggest events in the kind of gaming calendar, and it's not so much about announcements or events, but it's one of those things it's a networking event basically. You know, it's somewhere where you'll find a lot of indie developers go or people either working on projects or people want to get work. You know, they'll go there to sell themselves basically, and I think a lot of people miss that. They have this misconception about what GDC actually is, and we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks all the big hotshots have been kind of bailing out Sony, Microsoft, and everyone. And then a few days ago, they announced that the event had been postponed, and then it had been cancelled. And this really has hit a lot of the kind of indie development industry, part of the industry, because you know, there's a lot of stuff there that is just simply not refundable. Flights, hotels, you know, we're talking about San Francisco, one of the most expensive places in the world. And these are people that, you know, they invest a lot into this with the hopes that there will be a, you know, return investment somewhere in the future. But with this kind of stuff lost, you know, we've seen a lot of funding incentives to try and help people out. That's been really awesome, and it's been really an amazing thing to see within the industry. And I don't know how much to say. I mean, you've got this, you've got E3 apparently is still going to go ahead, but you know, I guess we'll kind of wait and see what happens with that.
Remember how I was going to sign up to E3?
Yeah, I know, right?
So I actually investigated it.
Oh, okay. Tell me about that.
But like, so you need like a letter like of proof of employment or something along those lines.
That's okay. Me and Dave can give you that.
Accredited. Yeah, I was wondering if you guys would write me a letter, like on a proper letterhead, to prove that I am an employee.
Wait, does that mean I have to give you a salary?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mind. You can pay me in rock shandies if you want. You can just send those over from the Republic, please. But yeah. So it's possible. So if you just get me that letterhead, I'll get myself on a plane to Los Angeles, and we can sort it all out.
But like we've had that. We had the announcement from Syria R earlier today that I think for like the whole of March or up until a certain point in April, all of their games are going to be behind closed doors.
Yep. James Bond's been
pushed back to November. For what the fuck did they say? I need to read that statement again because it made me laugh. Because it was so fucking like corporate speak.
I think it was weird because like they kind of put out there a few days ago, or it was picked up in the press, like, fans want James Bond pushed back due to coronavirus, and I was like, I don't actually feel like I've seen anybody say this. And then all of a sudden it's postponed. So I wonder if
here we go. It was MGM, Universal, and Bond producers Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli announced today that after careful consideration and thorough evaluation of the global theatrical marketplace, the release of No Time to Die will be postponed until November 2020. Like, all they had to say is, look, we can't release this in April because no one in China is going to go and see this.
Yeah. I mean, that was pretty much it.
You know, like, we're not fucking stupid. But anyway, slightly back on point. So this sucks. It's awesome that we've seen the industry come together to try and help these people out. I guess the thing that I want to know is E3, like, what is going to happen there? Because let's be honest, it's not exactly the most hygienic of fucking events anyway, considering everyone ends up coming back with some sort of illness or whatever. And I'm just as worried about going to a wrestling event this weekend. At this moment, do you think E3 will happen?
Yeah, I think E3 will happen. I think it just depends how America contains the breakdown. Like, do they let journalists from other countries like me fly in and be part of the event, or do they just say, no, fuck this, close borders? Like, I think that's been Trump's approach to a lot of situations. It's just to shut the borders down and not let anyone in, and then not let any problems in, kind of thing. I don't know what America's current stance is with the coronavirus, but I'd imagine it still takes place. And look, at the end of the day, if people are being more conscientious, if people are like washing their hands, they're making sure that they're not, that they're using gels and even masks or whatever, like, it's probably a good thing, regardless of the coronavirus, just people being generally a bit more healthy, you know. So I can't imagine that they would postpone an event that lots of people would want to travel in for. I'd be furious if I was a football fan in Italy. Like not getting to enjoy my football would be miserable. I don't know what I would do at that point. Like having been to 2 football games in the space of the last sort of 7 days and not contracted any viruses, having been multiple times on the tube every pretty much week in the last few weeks as well. So it's just interesting to see it. If it's like a sudden surge in outbreaks, then yeah, it might just be a sort of everyone work from home kind of type situation.
But I mean, we've seen cases pick up in England over the last, I want to say 48 hours or so. And so I can definitely see a case by, I don't know whether by the end of this weekend or by next weekend, where they might think of something similar for, because I know they cancelled the Ireland-Italy game last weekend. I think it was
the rugby game.
So I'm curious to see if there's something similar happens with the Premier League.
Yeah, I hope not. Just because, yeah, that's one of the few things that consistently like bring me joy in life, watching football, and obviously put like films and video games and music and stuff in there as well. But yeah, that would kind of suck. But if it's a necessary evil, then yeah. I mean, you think about it, brings into the European Championship kind of, and pretty much any event.
I mean, the Olympics. I think the Olympics is the big
the Olympics
one.
is in Japan, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in August. So I mean, I'm pretty sure they're hoping that they'll have like a bit of a lid on it by then, or at very least some sort of maybe like inoculation. Sorry, can't get that word out. From the virus.
Yeah, I was listening to, there's a podcast I listen to called TLDR News, and they were talking about,
Is it like 30 seconds long?
No, it's just they do really good kind of episodes. They're about 10 minutes long, where they try to take, whatever piece and put it in kind of like a short form thing that you could, like bite-sized digestible pieces. So they're really good for that, and they're very kind of like neutral, so they're not like loud think pieces. They're just like, here is the information as it is. So, which I appreciate. And they were just talking about like, the containment of this, and whether is it just a thing where just like everyone fucking gets it and then it's done and we're done with it, but problem with that is a lot of people will die, or we try to do this kind of slow containment thing, which gives us more time to basically find a cure, but there's a lot of work that goes into that, and a lot of cooperation, and means that we're probably going to end up with this thing where a lot of stuff gets cancelled over the next couple of months, and it's very much looking that way. I'm stunned. I'm genuinely stunned that the show I'm going to, or the events that I'm going to this weekend, are still going ahead. But I guess Germany is one of the places where it's not kind of picked up yet. So it's the flu. It's not going to kill us, but for other people,
I mean, it might kill some people, but
it has killed some people.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully.
But I don't need to spend 25 quid on a fucking surgery mask. I know that much.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. See, the whole podcast was you being outraged about 25 euros and with some stuff in the middle.
There we go. Well, on that note, thank you very much for listening. This has been episode 157, I think. I can't remember. Of Links to the Cast. So we were going to do a special on the Daniel Craig James Bond series, but I guess that can wait for a fucking while now.
Yeah, so the coronavirus has actually struck this podcast, because now we're having to push that back as well.
No one can escape.
Me and Dave are thinking of cooking something up on a movie series that might we might get to it at some time in the future, and something to do with being social and having popcorn and all of that good stuff. So,
how about that?
Yeah,
well,
if that comes back.
Actually, me and friend of the show Brian Rose, we were going to do a New Japan Cup prediction show, and that obviously went out the fucking window as well. So currently, plans, me and Dave will probably do a February wrap-up recap while we are in Germany at some point, and then we'll probably be back with this show in 2 weeks' time. Hopefully all of us will still be here, fingers crossed. But in the meantime, you can catch the show on all available podcasting platforms, as well as on YouTube, and you can find us over on Instagram, so give us a follow, and give us a follow on Twitter as well, because we had some good conversation today about the PlayStation 2 that I very much enjoyed. I've been Mark Robinson. As always, he's been Jack Lazel, and we will see you again next time.